Despite very significant improvements in the early years sector in the past decade, one thing hasn't changed. The layout in most settings follows conventional wisdom. Children's artwork is proudly displayed. There's lots of colourful plastic. Surfaces are packed with activities. It's a busy and stimulating environment. Now, though, there's an opposite and challenging view. And it's advice that some practitioners will find surprising.
Make sure that an environment isn't too cluttered. Also that the environment isn't overstimulating. That's really, really important that we consider the impact that excessive displays hanging from absolutely everywhere can actually have on a child's, it's almost like a sensory overload for them.
The new idea that the traditional layout of settings could be overstimulating and distracting for pupils is already proving controversial. One prominent head teacher has criticised the ideas. And later in the programme, David Fan and the report's author, Elizabeth Jarman, meet to discuss their differences.
You may find this the wrong colour, you may find it overstimulating, but as a head teacher, this is what I want and this is what I believe in.
I have to say that this report is certainly not encouraging people to have dull classrooms.
Right.
If we're wanting an environment that the children interact with, if we want an environment that is celebrating the children's work, I personally like to see the children involved in that.
Hey, I got one here. Get one. Yeah? Abby, give me a foot like this.
Bring them across to the wishing well because we're going to make...
Whilst there's widespread consensus that improvements to speaking and listening skills are required, the proponents of the new ideas accept that this means of achieving it, a fundamental rethink of layout, will be challenging.
It's very new, quite innovative, and although we found some brilliant examples of excellent practice, we are challenging what most people might have thought for the last quite a number of years.
The Basic Skills Agency, which has commissioned research into the learning environment, is keen to emphasise that new approaches to layout are being proposed for educational, not merely cosmetic reasons. Studies show that up to half of all children entering primary schools have difficulties with speaking and listening skills.
I think the reason it's become such a hot topic is because increasingly people are concerned about the limited language skills and the limited listening skills that many young children seem to have when they come to nursery, to preschool, and then when they go off to primary school.
There's this famous phrase from a researcher called James Britton ages ago now, who said that reading and writing float on a sea of talk. So in other words, if children find it difficult to talk and hard to listen, they're going to find it very hard to acquire the basic skills of literacy and numeracy as well.
So what we need to do is to make people aware of this difficulty and make people aware of the potential for it all to go wrong, and then we can make sure that local authorities and health authorities are working together to make sure to maximise each child's potential.
The new approach aimed at improving speaking and listening skills is called communication-friendly spaces, and improvements to layout are a big part of the initiative.
It's very important that when we're thinking about what a communication-friendly space looks like, that we really think about things from the child's perspective and that we really have that as a central consideration. That I think it's important for practitioners to almost walk around their setting at a child's height to really understand what the child is seeing.
Research shows that traditional strong primary colours may overstimulate children. Harsh strip lighting may not contribute to a good learning environment. Children react well to the availability of small, intimate spaces within a classroom, allowing them to initiate their own conversations.
Abby, do you have a fairy suit at home? Yeah, because to just fly around in the sky. Yeah.
It's also very important that there are cosy areas where children can withdraw to.
How do you kick the hedgehog?
It's really important as well to maximise the use of space in an environment, to really use every nook and cranny that's available.
And plenty of neutrals, both in furnishings and fabrics, allow children's work to be displayed without visual distraction. Settings can become polluted by noise, say the researchers. And quiet areas are essential to improve speaking and listening.
An excessively noisy environment is not going to be conducive, for instance, for a child who's really trying to listen to a speech sound.
The proposals on transforming the traditional look of settings are based on evidence gathered from academic studies around the world.
We were aware of all sorts of research that has been done, mainly in the States, it has to be said, into how the environment affects the way children learn. But we couldn't find anything that anybody had done that brings all that research together and shows what it looks like in a setting. So this work has been developed to try and put that research into practice and help people to find out what it might look like.
One setting which is adopting some of the ideas to encourage the development of speaking and listening skills is Trimdon Grange Nursery and Infant School in County Durham. Trimdon's head teacher has had a long-standing interest in classroom layout and the use of outdoor spaces. Such was her enthusiasm for new thinking in the area that some of her staff went to Italy to look at schools using an approach called the Regio model. It shares many of the principles which underpin communication-friendly spaces.
Their key impression of Italy was that everything was spacious, calm, well organised, uncluttered, and the background faded away, leaving the children's achievements in the foreground. So one of the first things that happened was a lot of furniture went into storage or went into a skip, and we made ourselves a much larger, more spacious kind of environment for the children. We looked at some of our equipment that was very brightly coloured and decided that we wanted to take a change of emphasis, and we slowly began to replace some of our very brightly coloured plastic equipment with as many natural materials as we could. So we went for an effect that was light, we used wood, we used hessian, we used very pale walls in the background.
Whilst the classrooms at Trimdon Grange may not look quite as decluttered as the purists would like, they do look different from traditional classrooms, and the differences do transfer to how the pupils learn, according to the head.
Well, the environment is a provocation, I suppose. The environment is there to encourage children to come forward with ideas, to look for things to investigate, to look for opportunities for creation. And our environment, and any environment which follows a Regio model, is always going to have plenty of opportunities for pupil independence.
Give a smile. I just cooked Daniel. David's doing it wrong.
And the activities and the areas which are laid out within it are going to be as open-ended as possible, so children can respond in as many ways as they can, according to their interests, according to their strengths, and according to the children that they're playing with.
What's happening to the glitter?
Falling down.
It's falling down. Is it making a nice pattern? What colours is it? What colours can you see?
Olivia, I'm over here. Silver.
Silver.
And pink.
Very nice.
So the environment is there for children to take their learning forward and adults to make the sensitive interventions according to the way that the children react to the environment.
So today I'm going to watch what you do, write down what you say, and then we'll share it all together. And I want you to think, next time I do that, Mrs. Richardson, I'd like to do this. Or next time, Mrs. Richardson, I'd like to do that.
The new thinking about learning environments also focuses on the importance of outside spaces and their capacity for providing challenge and stimulation, which improves pupils' speaking and listening skills. Again, the head teacher sent her staff out to scour the world for ideas. This time they went to Denmark to look at the country's famous forest schools.
In the forest schools, the staff were immediately struck by the fact that children hardly ever went indoors at all. And it was also in Denmark, where it was very cold. So any excuses that we can't go outside because it's cold were soon swept to one side. And in fact, in those schools, the children's education was almost entirely outside. It was very free-ranging, there wasn't an obviously structured curriculum, and staff responded to children's interests with small areas of provocation, but there was a much greater confidence in children's ability to keep themselves safe outside as well, not the preoccupation with health and safety that you sometimes see in schools in this country. And that was quite liberating. That was quite liberating because we saw that those children were safe, and yet they were able to take calculated risks with the support of adults. And I think when the staff returned here and wanted to do some more daring things outside, if you like, some more exciting and stimulating things, they felt empowered to do it.
Oh, I fell out here.
We also found ourselves more confident to take risks with very messy materials. So we began to use gloop and mud and hose pipes, and we invested in clothing that was going to keep the children safe and dry, and decided we would just go with it because the learning opportunities were so powerful that what's a little bit of mess compared to a huge conceptual gain.
Where does the brick go, Josh? Good boy. Onto the mortar. Clever boy. Press it down. Now, what did Mr. Ramsey do with the end of his trowel? You remember? He went... Good boy, do you want to help her?
But changes of this order cost money. Catherine Wharton estimates she spent £25,000.
Well, the changes in the building have all been financed from within normal school budget. So we haven't had any additional funding, although we have done the same kind of fundraising that most schools would do. But the real quality equipment is expensive. There's no way around it. It's worth the investment, but you just have to build it up slowly over time.
Advocates of the communication-friendly approach say that some changes can be made at small cost, and that creativity in the use of funding is all important.
If we're looking at realistically what role money is going to play in how successful or not this is, then I think realistically it plays a very big role. I've never been one to accept anybody's excuse that says we can't afford to do this so that we can't do it. There are lots of things you can do with very little money, with a lot of creativity, with no money at all. The other thing is I think sometimes early years settings really need to think very carefully about how they're spending the money they do have, because I think sometimes that money isn't as well used as it might be, and that comes back to looking at what it is really important.
Elizabeth Jarman, whose report is pioneering the new thinking, has produced a toolkit which shows how the ideas can be translated into action. Links to the toolkit, which costs £10, can be found on the Teachers TV website. And later on in this programme, we'll look at how one school in Yorkshire has transformed a small area using some of the principles of communication-friendly spaces for as little as £100. But perhaps one of the most effective ways of managing transformations in learning environments is to design them in from scratch. At Homewood School in South London, they were able to use some of the new thinking in a purpose-built space. Again, the head has been inspired by the forest schools of Denmark and how they use light. This is important because research shows that children learn faster in classrooms with lots of natural light.
We're similar in some ways, in that we don't always have a lot of light in this country because of our weather. And what struck me was the windows and the angles of the windows. They would make a building look almost like a ship, you know, in terms of the roof being made of glass, so that allowed a lot of light in. And I've always wanted lots of light for our children.
The head was able to brief the architect on what she wanted. That included as much natural light as possible, and to use soft, diffuse overhead lighting rather than the harsh strip lighting found in so many schools.
Looking at the lighting, I mean, one of the things that can be desperate about childcare buildings
is that you go in and it might be a very nice building, but then the whole place is covered in fluorescent lights. So rather than it looking like somewhere which is homely and friendly, which is really important for children, it looks like an office environment, which just is very deadening for colours, very deadening for paintings, very deadening for the children.
Again, it's not simply an aesthetic matter. Fluorescent lighting is actually banned in some European countries, and research shows that both reading and numeracy improves in areas with lots of natural light.
It's right, it's the sun's come out, when it's dark, you
Yeah.
can go to sleep.
That's right, when you go to sleep.
The Communication Friendly Spaces Toolkit also emphasises the need for some darker, more cosy spaces, which act as a focus for children to communicate with one another, rehearsing their speaking and listening skills.
Well, the contrast between light and dark is something that I think is really very exciting for children. As you go into the classroom itself, that's quite a dark space in places. And partly, actually, that's really important for children to feel sort of quiet and snug in some places. But also, I think what you can do is to create too many windows, too many doors, and then there's actually nowhere to make the home corner, nowhere to make the small spaces that children need, and to put the furniture against the walls and that sort of thing. So it's actually a combination of both of those things.
But isn't creating these positive learning environments really the job of local authorities? And doesn't it require a great deal of funding?
Early years can't manage on a shoestring. It's been underfunded for far too long, and we've really welcomed the additional funding over the last 9-10 years. But nonetheless, if we're going to really create both the sort of environment we want for young children, but also the sort of adults, the trained adults we need to have working with young children, then that has got huge financial implications, both for individual settings, but also for local authorities and for national government. And one of the things that I think will make successful or not a focus on communication and language development is if we really have the same sort of investment in that in the early years that we've seen over the last few years in literacy and mathematics in the primary sector. That's the sort of size of training investment we really do need to be seeing with the people who work with our youngest children.
Whilst progress on the big picture funding of developing communication skills in early years will take time, advocates of the new approach say that practitioners and settings can take positive steps themselves at low cost. White Lath School on the outskirts of Leeds did that very thing, deciding to make over a small outside space to provide the kind of cosy den which helps children to develop their own speaking and listening skills.
We wanted to make the patio more comfortable, more cosy, warmer. And so we made some drapes and had them hanging down in sort of autumn colours to create warmth. We also put up a divider so the area was smaller, so the children felt comfortable. We got natural elements, the logs to put the books on and have the children sitting on. Fabric was probably one of the most expensive things. That's probably about £35. We got carpet donated, and we made the divider, and that was probably about £30 as well.
Staff read the Communication Friendly Spaces Toolkit before the makeover. Was it useful?
I think that the changes would have to be taken a little bit at a time, and maybe it's not for everyone to go the whole way down the toolkit. And so, you know, using wooden furniture would be great. It's really expensive, so we can't all do that straight away. We can try and have some quality items. Changing all the displays in the rooms isn't for every environment, but adapting the displays so that they're more focused, so they're linked to the needs of the children, is probably something that everybody can do. So I'd look at the toolkit and take out the elements, the key elements, and use them, but I wouldn't necessarily think that everyone has to go down the routes that some of the specialist settings have chosen.
And has the makeover been successful?
We've noticed the children are really keen to go outside and use the area. As time's gone on, with the adults modelling how to use the area, they've been using their communication skills longer and better and having great fun in there. They love snuggling under the blankets and having secret conversations and reading the books to the toys. And each week we'll be changing the props in there so they can develop their skills and remain interested and add different things. We're looking to add ICT things, torches, tape recorders, things like that, just to keep stimulating them. But at the moment, despite the weather, they've really enjoyed being out there, and there's certainly more children on the patio and more children doing communication activities.
Success on a small scale. But will the new approach find favour throughout the early years community? It's already proving controversial, with one prominent head teacher expressing trenchant criticism of the ideas. We asked the report's author, Elizabeth Jarman, and primary head, David Fan, to meet at his school. The head's a great fan of pupil displays and of the traditional approach to layout.
One of the key elements that I really hope people take from this piece of work is more of an understanding of how the physical environment that they set up for children connects with their underpinning educational philosophy. Because the way that a space is physically set up says an awful lot to children about, for instance, what kind of interactions are welcome there, what kind of behaviours are welcome there.
And I worry that people who are very reflective in their practice are suddenly going to think, well, everything I'm doing now is wrong. And I think teachers as a profession feel very much under attack at times, and yet this is another report that says you're doing it wrong. This is a guide for teachers to examine their environment, not to throw everything out like the baby with the bathwater.
Everybody who is being reflective is open to new ideas, or should be. We know, though, in this country that there are 50% of our children coming into school with speech and language difficulties, and so it's very important that we examine all aspects of how we can support those children to improve those skills.
I realise the significance of good quality interaction, and many of our children coming to our school don't have that. How do we get head teachers who are in inner city areas where SAT scores are poor, league tables are a pressure? How do we get those head teachers and those practitioners confident enough to say, well, we really think quality, like speaking and listening in the foundation unit, will bear dividends later on? And I worry, will this report actually have any significance to those settings?
This is another element, and as I said, it's been designed for those delivering the early years foundation stage. But I do think that from the practice that's already been highlighted in the report, that head teachers or heads of centres who have, for instance, Key Stage 1 students or older, can learn a lot from some of the ideas within this.
This is a school, for instance, that was built only 14 years ago, and it has quite serious flaws. Very few of the windows are at child height. The ventilation's poor in the school. There's low ceilings, which exacerbate at times the echoing effect. We're still hitting a barrier when it comes to architecture and planning in schools, that actually they don't take enough account of what children and staff need.
We've looked, for instance, at the whole area of colour schemes that are used in schools and in classrooms. The colour test showed that children have a physical reaction quite often to particular kinds of colours, and so that needs to be considered when we're planning areas and making sure that we're choosing the right colour schemes that are going to help children to, for instance, be calm or focused, as opposed to fired up by, for example, painting a colour bright red, painting an area bright red.
You know, we've got a school here that's got red as its main colour, and that was chosen by the LEA and architects, and actually, you know, I think we need to look at the basic fabrics before we move on. And I read your report, and your views, and say, well, you may find this the wrong colour, you may find it overstimulating, but as a head teacher, this is what I want and this is what I believe in. I personally feel that it's part of the experience that children get when they're at school. The fact that they can celebrate their work, the fact that there's words on the wall. I think it's a very important part of their education.
we're certainly not saying tear down
No.
all of your displays.
Good.
What we're wanting to see is more of a neutral environment background-wise so that the children's work can go centre stage. So, for example, if you've got a group of children in a story area listening to a story that the teacher's reading, looking at a big book, for instance, you wouldn't particularly want a very, very busy display in the background there for obvious reasons, that the children will be very distracted.
One of the best teachers I've ever seen was a teacher who read the book Stig of the Dunk by Clive King, and she made her room a den, Stig's den, Stig's cave. And the children were completely immersed in the environment. It was an experience, and it allowed them to step out of their own environment and move into Stig's environment, and for them, they got a massive amount out of that book.
I have to say that this report is certainly not encouraging people to have dull classrooms.
Right.
If we're wanting an environment that the children interact with, if we want an environment that is celebrating the children's work, I personally like to see the children involved in that. It's a way of recording their learning and also an opportunity for us to annotate their work and record what they've said, and they can then refer back to that, and it can then reinforce speaking and listening skills and the activities that they're engaged in that area, for instance.
The debate will continue, because a reappraisal of traditional layout is bound to cause a great deal of reflection, challenging, as it does, practice that's held dear in many settings. You can join the debate by logging on to the Teachers TV website to see what other people working in your sector have to say about the ideas raised by communication-friendly spaces.